In the previous video, we built hardwood steps for our back door using traditional techniques so they look like they came from the original house that was built back in 1890. In this video, we'll be adding posts made from reclaimed hardwood for some balustrades. We demolished parts of the original house that was built back in 1890 and kept many of the materials, including this hardwood post that will be ideal for our handrails. It is a bit rough, and once cleaned up will still have a certain roughness to it, but we like this because we want the stairs to look like they were built with the original house. The clean-up work includes removing all the old rusty nails and hardware attached to the post, some of which are quite difficult to get off. Then scraping the old flaking paint off. Scraping is the most effective way of removing old paint. If it won't come off easy, then a hot air gun helps. No need for that here though, the old paint came off quite easily. Then a belt sander is used with 40 grit to begin with, followed by 80 grit to get a suitable amount of smoothness. Definitely need to wear a face mask with this process because the old paint is more than likely to have lead in it, not particularly good for one's health. We have added the posts and tops of the handrails to the drawing we did earlier when building the steps. To meet building code, the handrail must be 900 millimeters above the landing and the nosing of each step, which sets the length of our posts. The post we have is only just long enough, so must be marked out very carefully. It also has pieces cut out of it, so we need to line up our cutouts with those already on the post if we can, so we don't need to fill them in.
Right, now to do the cutting. I've already set the saw so it'll cut to 50 millimeters, which is exactly what we want.
We then take the excess out with a chisel.
Now, to cut the post in half, it's easier to do it on old faithful drop saw. Line that up. It's probably not going to do it in one pass. Made it most of the way. You just need to flip it over. Back up again. Do the last little bit. Should have done it this way around, shouldn't we? Damn. Still one tiny corner there, not done. Now we can see how this fits. Oh. We have a little bit of a problem here. Okay, more cutting. Now you want the post to be flush, so with the front. So we need to cut to there, which is to there. piece just popped off. Also scraped the shit out of that. Sander will fix that. Yeah, it's pretty good.
That scrape mark is easily fixed with a disc sander that is also handy for finishing off other cut edges, including the fronts of the stringers. Now, to put this post on, ideally we want to fix it there and down there. That's a solid beam, so we'll need to use a couple of batten screws. We could put a bolt through here. Just needs to be about 170 millimeters long.
In the meantime, we can trim this. And then before we make this angle cut off here, we'll check it. Right. We just place this where it's supposed to be. We can make sure that we've got that angle right. Mark that. And then check it.
As it works out, our new cutout will be where the old one is. We then remark that angle so the post will be plumb.
Right, the saw is still set at a depth of 50 mil. So if I then run this through,
The first cut needs to be accurate. Then a whole lot of other cuts are made to set the depth of the material to be removed. That is then taken out with a hammer, then chiseled out down to those cuts. When chiseling with the grain, if the grain isn't dead straight, it can split off below the line, so we need to come in at different angles, including across the grain, to get this as accurate as possible. The final finish doesn't need to be dead smooth, because it will never be seen. We then check out how this one fits too.
beautiful. Just like I bought one. Right, we have the hardware we need here. Found these bolts down in the back shed. Obviously bought them for something a while ago. Never used them. Ideal for the bottom post. Piece of threaded rod. Nuts and washers for the top part of the top post. And then a couple of long batten screws for the bottom part to go into the end of the beam.
We then mark the holes out for the bottom post bolts, which is a bit trickier than you would think, because they need to have enough clearance from the tread so we can get a spanner on the nuts. Then when drilling holes in this really hard wood, it starts smoking, so it must be done in short bursts, even with a freshly sharpened bit. Making sure the post is plumb, we then need to drill holes in the stringer, starting with the top hole. But when fitting the bolt, because they are cuphead bolts, the holes in the post need to be slightly wider at the top, so the head of the bolt pulls in flush and grips into the timber, so when we do the nut up, the bolt doesn't turn on us. We then once again make sure the post is plumb and drill the bottom hole into the stringer, then fit the bottom bolt, making sure it's good and tight.
Right, That ain't going anywhere.
We then move on to marking out the top post, and once again make sure there is enough clearance to do the nut up on the threaded rod, and the batten screws line up with the beam. The bottom of the steps make a good workbench for drilling the holes in that really hard wood. The top post is a little different to fit than the bottom.
What we're actually doing here is also fixing the stringer for the steps to the landing from this end, as well as holding the post on. Right, now slide that back on without crushing fingers. Slide our threaded rod through there with a nut on the top. Although it's probably desirable to flush that in, isn't it? Yeah. We'll take the risk and do it from here. It just looks a bit neater, I think. Yeah, it's flushed in there. I can tidy that up later. Another nut washer on the back there.
The tricky part here is there is nothing to stop the threaded rod from turning while we tighten the nuts up. So we need to hold it in place with some vice grips. But how do we do this? Solution is to thread the nuts on loosely by hand, then clamp the vice grips on excess threaded rod past one nut, then tighten up the other nut. Then we make sure the post is plumb, easier done from the top of the stairs. Then the batten screws can be wound in. These are self-countersinking, so wind in fairly flush, even in that really hard wood, although still need to be pre-drilled so they don't snap, as that's a pain in the butt. And that's it for fitting the posts. In the next video, we install the handrails that are a bit tricky because of the angles.